for authors, filmmakers, entertainment, and all your listening needs. Listen now to Talk Now Radio, where no topic is taboo.
Hello everyone, welcome to Talk Now Radio, listener-supported radio, where no topic is taboo, and your support helps keep it that way. This is your host, Royce the Redneck Radio Man, and joining me today is going to be Andrew Collins, and we're going to be talking about his recent book, and if I'm pronouncing this correctly, and I may not be, I'll let him correct me, it's Gobeckly Tepi, and I'm thinking Tepi may be TEPE, but we can find that out here in just a minute. Before we go too much further, if you folks like to call in and ask a question, the call-in number is 832-632-7904. And you can learn more about Andrew by going to his website, www.andrewcollins.com. If any of y'all are interested in purchasing the book during the show, scroll down below the chat room. You'll see his description and his picture, book cover and all that. You'll also see a link to Amazon where you can get it. And after we archive the show over the next couple of days, it'll be in my archives for future reference for the same purpose for posterity. So, Andrew, how you doing today?
Yeah, I'm good. Yeah. It's slightly overcast in London here. England's playing in the football, or soccer as you call it, later this evening against Italy, so I'm looking forward to that. But for now, let's talk about the ancient mysteries.
Okay. Well, did I get that pronunciation correct?
That was absolutely perfect. Gobeckly Tepi. Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. You know, I got to tell you, Andrew, when you first started this project, I actually saw it when it came out on the History Channel. And I believe you found a thing out there that they called Adam's Clock, or you called it Adam's Clock?
I think you're talking about Adam's calendar.
Yes, that's what I meant to say.
No, that's in South Africa, and that's something entirely different.
Oh, I thought it was part of the same project. I got mixed up. I'm sorry.
No, as I say, it's on a different continent and relates to something entirely different. So we probably won't get onto that tonight. Let's concentrate on Gobeckly Tepi.
Let's get to this one here where we're supposed to be at, and I just apologize for that one. But I also understand that this is somehow connected to the discovery of Eden.
Absolutely. I mean, if you look in the Book of Genesis and follow the exact instructions as to where the Garden of Eden, which was a kingdom or land in its own right, is geographically situated, it will take you right into the area of Göbekli Tepe in southeast Turkey. Okay,
so was you by any chance able, or did you find time to look for any of the other two rivers that were missing off of, because there were 4 rivers in Genesis that met right there in the garden. Did you see all 4 of them by any chance?
Absolutely. I mean, I in 2 years ago, I went back out. I mean, I've been to Turkey on various occasions, back out to Turkey, looking at the very location that seems to be indicated by the Book of Genesis. And as you mentioned, 2 of the rivers are easily identified. These are the rivers of paradise, by the way. One is the Euphrates River, which flows, takes its rise in southeast Turkey, and then eventually flows down through Iraq into the Persian Gulf, as does the River Tigris, which is one of the other rivers of paradise. That takes its rise in eastern Turkey, and also flows parallel with the Euphrates. That's also one of the rivers of paradise. Now, the third one is almost certainly the Artsis River, which flows from eastern Turkey eastward and empties into the Caspian Sea, which is in Iran. Well, it's in Azerbaijan actually, but the Caspian Sea is generally associated with Iran. And the fourth river is a contentious one. It's one that ancient mystery writers can cite, their own evidence, and this can chop and change. But certainly for the last couple of thousand years, it's been associated with a river which is actually one major branch of the Tigris River, and it's known as the Greater Zab, Z-A-B. And this takes its rise just to the south of the great inland sea known as Lake Van, and then flows southwards from Turkey, going into Iraq, and eventually joining the Tigris, which obviously empties into the Persian Gulf. So those are the main four. Now, you could see variations, but the important thing about it is that all of these four rivers rise roughly within a 100-mile radius of each other. And if you look for the centre point of all the different tributaries that contribute to them, it takes you right into the area of a huge plain, which is about, something like 20, 30 miles by about 10 miles wide, known as the Plain of Mush. Now, this is M-U-S-H. And it's just to the west of this inland sea that I mentioned earlier, Lake Van. And it was one of the most fertile regions of the whole of, this land, of which we know today as Turkey. In the past, it was a part of historical Armenia, and was right the way through until, the last 100 years or so. But today, it's firmly a province of Turkey. And I went there in 2012, and inspired, by the work that I was doing. And I came across the ruins of a monastery, which people had never really focused their minds on at all in the past, where the monks actually believed not only was their monastery located in the Garden of Eden, but that they also had, as a very important holy relic, a piece of what they believed was the Tree of Life. And it was the subject of various miracles and legends and things like that. Plus, they also had a container in which was the dregs, the last mix of the terrestrial or earthly form of something known as the oil of mercy. Now, this is the liquid, the oil that supposedly oozes from the trunk of the Tree of Life in the Garden of Paradise. And the story is that God actually gave Moses the recipe to how to recreate this in terrestrial form. And this particular oil was said to have miraculous powers, but also, just like the tree itself, it was able to bestow immortality. And it was for this reason that people came from all over the region to this particular monastery to actually take pieces of the tree over which these holy relics had been buried at the beginning of the Christian era, and because they believed that the whole place was sacred, the tree was an evergreen. It obviously was a representation of the Tree of Life itself. And this was a part of a tradition which, although Judeo-Christian in nature, somehow echoes the fact that this is also the cradle of civilization. This is the place where the Neolithic revolution began at the time of Gobeckly Tepi. And it's because of the presence of Gobeckly Tepi in this region that all of this came about.
Okay, now you were telling me that this is somewhere close to the Aramean area. So
Yeah.
is this kind of like somewhere close to where the Iraq joins the Caucasus Mountains area, kind of like an in-between area there?
It's that area, exactly. But I would say it's probably just slightly to the north of where you've just said there. There are two parallel sets of mountains that run to the north and south of the Plain of Mush. On the north side, it's the Armenian what known as the Armenian Highlands, and there is one particular sacred mountain in there that rivals even Mount Ararat as probably the original place of God or throne of God. and the place associated with the Watchers of Enochian tradition. And on the south side of the Plain of Mush is the Eastern Taurus Mountains. And these run, as I say, east-west from beneath Lake Van right away, and one branch of them even goes down to Gobeckly Tepi, at the area of Gobeckly Tepi. And to the south of those mountains is another set of mountains, which are generally known as the Gordian Mountains. And one of those is the location where the Ark of Noah, Noah's Ark, is said to have come to rest after the time of the flood. And the fact of the matter is that all of the early stories that you find in the Book of Genesis are all located in and around the area, just within a 100 to a couple of 100 miles of where Gobeckly Tepi is located today. I mean, the Garden of Eden, the so-called place of descent, where the ark came to rest after the time of the flood, and even right the way down to the time of Abraham, the patriarch who takes obviously all of these early Semitic Hebrew ideas and transports them from this region into the promised land of God, Canaan. He is supposed to have been born at a place called Ur of the Chaldees, which Muslims and Christians and various other people in the region all associate with the city of Urtha, which is currently known today as Shunlurfa, which is only 8 miles away from Gobeckly Tepi. Plus, just beneath Gobeckly Tepi, in the plain below, is the ancient city of Haran. Now, Haran is where Abraham is supposed to have stayed with his family before making that journey to Canaan. And Haran's a very, very important place because it was a place of the moon worshippers who venerated a god called Sin, S-I-N. But much earlier than this, there was a Neolithic encampment there going back virtually to the age of Gobeckly Tepi. And there's a very good chance that the people that constructed Gobeckly Tepi actually lived in settlements like this in the plains below. So that some of the ideas that would have been current at the time of Gobeckly Tepi, which was constructed 10 to 12,000 years ago, may easily have filtered through to Haran and been preserved there by its indigenous inhabitants right the way through, to the Christian era, in all honesty.
Makes sense. I mean, monotheism didn't come around until the days of Akhenaten and Moses, and there was worship long before that, from the days of Adam up till Moses or Abraham. Moon worship was probably around long before monotheism.
Absolutely. That's exactly correct. And in fact, it has been proposed that, that Yahweh, Jehovah, the Hebrew God, and of course Allah, the Islamic, All-Father or God, both have their roots in a moon god that was venerated in the Near East, as much as, 5,000 years ago. So, these ideas were there, and certainly Abraham is definitely associated with moon worship. I mean, most of the stories actually talk about him turning away from those beliefs to the monotheistic God, and even turning over the idols of the moon worshippers. But it's almost pedantic because quite clearly he was associated with that cult, and almost certainly originally was a member of that moon worshipping religion of Haran.
Which the Bible does not dispute that at all. That's why he left his country and his kindred, was to follow the monotheistic route.
Absolutely.
Now, this moon god you referred to, would it be by any chance Yah, the Egyptian moon god?
Maybe. I mean, obviously, the veneration of the moon god himself, or obviously herself if it's female, is something that goes back tens of thousands of years before even the time of Gobeckly Tepi. I mean, at Gobeckly Tepi, if we can just maybe describe this now, if listeners can imagine Stonehenge in my own country of England, if you can multiply that by 20 times, cover the stones with beautiful reliefs of animals and birds and insects, plus also make the pillars, which some of which are as much as 18 feet tall and weigh 15 to 20 tons apiece. If you then put arms on them, like bas relief arms that curve round to the front narrow edges of the stones in long spindly fingers, you give them some kind of abstract representation of a dress, or jacket or something, plus necklaces around their neck with symbols hanging, T-shaped terminations. This is very important because that represents the abstract head of an individual, and create these stone circles, possibly as many as 20 of them, and put them on the top of this elevated platform on a mountain top in southeast Turkey. That's what Gobeckly Tepi is. That's what the archaeologists have been uncovering ever since its modern day discovery in about 1995. And this is the place which is changing everything. It's the smoking gun of a lost civilization, and the fact that we had extremely high technology at this early age.
Had to put them stones up.
Well, absolutely. I mean, certainly they had the technical capability. They were engineers in a manner which previously has not been recognised officially. And now we know that this is absolutely the case, that Gobeckly Tepi is the foundation point of what we'd call civilization today.
Okay. Now, I was reading your books and I noticed that you even had a picture in there of this here guy you were just now describing a minute ago with the arms, engraved in stone.
Yeah.
You mentioned it, referred to it as sort of an early made work of 3D art.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what you're referring to there, but I mean the actual stones themselves, I would say, represent the great ancestors of the people that actually constructed the monuments themselves. In at least two of the main enclosures, there are 12 stones in the outer rings, and two further stones, even larger than the ones in the outer rings, standing in the middle, acting as like huge portals or stargates, basically, in the middle of which I think the shaman would have stood to project their mind into the cosmos, into the sky world, a sky world which they believed existed somewhere in the vicinity of the Milky Way, most likely where it splits in two to form what's known as the Great Rift or the Cygnus Rift, which is marked by the constellation of Cygnus, which is the celestial bird, the celestial swan, also known as the Northern Cross of obviously the northern night sky. This is the exact spot where the Milky Way breaks in two, and this has been seen as the point of entry and exit to the sky world across the world by many cultures and civilizations, probably since the Paleolithic age, even before the time of Gobeckly Tepi. So in other words, when we get to Gobeckly Tepi, we find that these enclosures seem to be aligned specifically to the brightest star of Cygnus as it sets on the horizon, then we know that the interest of these people was in trying to target that star so that they could use the Milky Way to reach what they considered to be the afterlife or the other world or the sky world or the upper world, which is somewhere that the shaman would need to go in order to do his duty or her duty. And that duty, it would seem, 10 to 12,000 years ago, was to try and counter the cosmic tricksters, the supernatural animals that were seen as responsible for the chaos that had been reigning in the world up to that point. So what do I mean by chaos? Well, around 10,900 BC, there almost certainly was a comet impact on this Earth. And let me describe the situation. It's very likely that a comet came into the inner solar system, passed its way round the sun, broke up as it did so, and out the other side were literally hundreds and thousands of small fragments that were then thrust onto a trajectory where they would collide with the Earth. They would go into the Earth's orbit and collide with the planet, creating mass wildfires across the globe. And this would produce masses of clouds of ash that would have gone up into the air and caused a period of darkness, something we know today as the nuclear winter. And this would have lasted probably for years. And during it would have been falls of rain caused through when the parts of the ice sheets, which had existed at that time, were on the retreat, were quite literally vaporized by these fragments of comets, sending all of the water that was held up into the upper atmosphere. This would mix with the ash and then rain back down as acid rain. And it may well be that this fell for 40 days, 40 nights, exactly like the Bible tells us happened at the time of Noah's flood, which is an event, a legendary event, which I do believe was real and was almost certainly a memory of this event around 10,900 BC. But what's more important here is that this event not only triggered a mini ice age that lasted 1,300 years and ended only shortly before the first temples were constructed at Gobeckly Tepi, but also that there were aftershocks occurring in the world for several hundred years after the initial event. And this would involve probably, volcanoes going up, earthquakes, and also other cosmic events, possibly other fragments of the comet hitting the Earth right the way through until about 10,300 BC. And, so if you can imagine the people in southeast Turkey around 9,600, 9,500 BC, they're still in fear that this type of terrible cataclysm can occur again. And a lot of the catastrophe legends do tell us that after these terrible events of fire and flood and darkness, that the first temples were constructed, that the people actually blamed themselves for what had occurred. Maybe they'd taken the wrong path, they were killing each other, they were getting too haughty, or things like this, and that, wise ones who remained afterwards and were not killed said, we must appease the gods to try and make sure that this doesn't happen again, or that we need to counter what's going on in some way. And I think that somehow this is linked to the construction of Göbekli Tepe shortly afterwards, because I believe that the shamans involved with it, who I don't think were local, I think that they came in from the north, I'll come on to them separately if I can, were people who had some ability to be able to counter these cosmic tricksters in the sky world. And these cosmic tricksters were seen specifically in certain forms, almost certainly either sky dogs, sky wolves, or sky foxes. That seems to have been what they saw in terms of the appearance of comets in the sky, were seen as the tails of these, these wolves or wolves or foxes mostly that would appear in the sky. And it's a tradition that has come down to us, not only across the Eurasian continent, but also in Africa and even in the United States, and in the Americas in general, that there is an association between dogs, foxes in particular, as tricksters who can cause chaos in the world, can cause destruction, can cause catastrophe. And I mean, one of the most obvious forms of this trickster is in Norse mythology, where you have this wolf called Fenris or Fenrir. who is said to have brought about the doom of the gods, the twilight of the gods, which even destroyed not just the earth, but also various of the gods themselves, before finally these cosmic forces were brought under control and the world returned to normal. But by that time, a lot of the gods had been killed, the human race had been killed, and only a few gods and a couple like Adam and Eve remained to repopulate the world. And there was a US congressman in 1884 by the name of Ignatius Donnelly, who wrote a book called Ragnarok of Fire and Ice, and the Age of Fire and Ice. And what he said in there was that the story of Ragnarok was a memory of this comet impact towards the end of the last ice age. And he said that Fenris and the other wolves and dogs featured in the story were comet fragments that entered into our atmosphere. And I think he was bang on the nail. I mean, we most know this guy for another book that he did, which is Atlantis, the Antediluvian World, which came out 2 years earlier.
I recognized his name when you said it.
Well, that came out in 1882, which was 2 years earlier. But Ragnarok, The Age of Fire and Ice, is an extraordinary book because it sets out for the first time how these catastrophe legends are a memory of a comet impact that took place at the end of the last ice age, or towards the end of the last ice age. And now we know that's real. Why do we know it's real? Because the evidence is being found by climatologists and geologists and archaeologists at a certain level corresponding to 10,900 BC and obviously, later. And there is a thick layer of black ash and debris, which includes cosmic debris and nanodiamonds and things like this, stuff which are produced by impact events. It's been found not only across Europe, but across Southwest Asia, very close to Gobeckly Tepi, but also as far away as Egypt and Russia and Australia and, of course, the United States. In fact, the United States would seem to have suffered more than anywhere else in the world. It would seem that the larger fragments hit probably the area of the Great Lakes, but there's some speculation that it caused what's known as the Carolina Bays. That's hundreds, if not thousands, of elliptical craters that are located in various states from New York all the way down to Florida, and obviously mainly concentrated in the Carolinas, in the Carolina areas. So, this is a real event, and science is now recognising that this event took place. And the fact that Göbekli Tepe was constructed just after it is no coincidence. There is no such thing as coincidence, really. Clearly, there's a relationship. So, what I'm proposing is that Göbekli Tepe was almost like, if you like, a sort of, a launch pad, if you like, or a stargate for the shamans of the period to project their minds in altered states of consciousness into the sky world, a sky world that existed in the area of Cygnus and the Milky Way, and that here they believed that they could counter these supernatural forces that they believe were responsible for cataclysms like that which their ancestors had seen. And in this way, they believed that they could keep the stability of the world and prevent it from undergoing any more catastrophes of this sort. But then we come on to who was responsible. We now know when. It was between 10 and 12,000 years ago. We know why, or we can speculate why. So who was behind it? Well, I think you've got to look at the local population at this time. They were hunter-gatherers. They were not agriculturalists. The Neolithic revolution had not begun yet. That didn't begin until around 9,000 to about 8,500 BC. And yet, you've got these hunter-gatherers who are normally nomadic peoples. Normally, they would only work in small groups. They may have a few temporary settlements here and there. Maximum of perhaps 50 people would be there at any one time, but they would be seasonal. People would move on following the flocks, following the herds, the game, which, like the reindeer and things like this, or the ibexes, or whatever it was that they followed to provide them with everything they needed to live. And they didn't generally get together in their thousands to create monuments like Gobeckly Tepi. So what happened? Well, I believe that these people were suffering from something that visionary writer Barbara Han Clough referred to in a book of this title called Catastrophobia. And it's a great, great title, because what it actually infers is a fear of cataclysm, or a fear of recurring cataclysm. It's something which psychoanalysts might be interested in today, but there were no psychoanalysts around in 9600 BC at the end of this mini ice age, the so-called Younger Dryas event, as it's known. And so you've got these people still living in fear that something bad was about to happen again. And I think that into their midst came a group of individuals, very charismatic people, probably very strange-looking people. I think they were quite tall. They had long heads, quite striking facial features. That's all what the anatomical evidence suggests. And that they came from the north, probably via the Caucasus in between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. And their original point of origin was in the area of what's known as the Eastern European Plain, which stretched all the way from the Carpathian Mountains of Central Europe right the way across some of the big rivers of Central Russia, like the Don and the Volga, and goes right the way north to the area of the Baltic, the countries such as Latvia and Lithuania, and even the Scandinavian countries of Norway and Sweden, etc., etc. This was a vast, vast area, but operating in this area was an extremely advanced group known as the Swiderians. They had a very advanced stone tool making technology. They were miners, I mean deep miners, creating some of the earliest mining activities in human history in the area of Poland, which is just to the north of the Carpathian Mountains. And they had a particular penchant for exotic materials, different types of flint, and a volcanic glass of great magical power known as obsidian, something which is known very much from its interest amongst the Maya and the Aztecs and things of today. But it was also something that was prized by the peoples of Eastern Europe. And there were two main areas of focus for obsidian. One was the Carpathian Mountains, where the Swiderian peoples, as they're known to archaeology, would seem to have had their original territories. And then the other area is in the area we now know today as Turkey, in central Turkey, but also in the area of the Caucasus, and south of that in the area of the Armenian highlands, the very area that we've already earmarked as the Garden of Eden. And I think that these peoples entered into the area of Göbekli Tepe from the Armenian highlands, from the Garden of Eden, and that what they did, they were traders as well. So they would actually gain a foothold in communities by trading different exotic materials. But once they did this, I think that they then preached their philosophies, some of which were almost messianic. And these were basically, look, we know you're suffering from what we're calling today catastrophobia, this fear that something bad's going to happen again. But we can sort it out. If you listen to us, we can help you. And providing you do what we ask of you, we can help you. And what they offered was methods that the shamans could counteract these cosmic tricksters by supersizing their religious houses, their sanctuaries, their enclosures, to create, these enclosures like at Göbekli Tepe, and that these satisfied the minds of the people, to make them feel that something now, early warning stations, were there where the shamans could do their work to counter these supernatural tricksters in the sky, the sky wolf, the sky fox, because it does appear that these incoming peoples that came from the north, almost certainly from the area of the Russian plain, which covers most of Eastern Europe above the Black Sea, that one of their main totems was that of the wolf. They believed that they were wolf shamans, that they could counter the effects of the wolf. But this wasn't their only symbol. They were also, one of their other symbols would seem to have been the celestial bird, the swan, which is the main symbol of Cygnus. And I think that they brought the whole importance of the cosmology of the swan and the Cygnus and the Milky Way into Eastern Anatolia, what we know today as Turkey, and that's one of the reasons why Cygnus features so strongly at Gobeckly Tepi.
I know that I think it's Gary David has a book out about Cygnus, the Cygnus Mystery, I think it's called.
That's my book.
That's your book. Oh, yep. My God, I'm getting my authors mixed up.
Yeah, Gary David's got a book out called I think it's called The Orion Zone.
Okay, that may be what I'm doing. Yeah. I'm getting those transposed. But what I was gonna say is that if you look at Egypt, their groundwork is lined up. Their pyramids on the ground and their monoliths, what have you, their shrines, to match the stars in Orion. I mean, it's like it was commonplace back then for each culture to have their separate place in the sky that they worshipped.
Well, that's true, but in the book you've just mentioned, the Cygnus Mystery, what I show is that the stars of Cygnus actually match much better with the three pyramids, and that the veneration of Cygnus was just as strong amongst the pyramid builders, and perhaps even more so, and that in my personal opinion, they reflect the shape and position of the three belts, the three wing stars of Cygnus in its role as a celestial bird. But what we find is that Cygnus has been seen as a place of entrance and exit to the sky world all the way around the world. I've just completed another book, I've written, contributed to another book called The Path of Souls. The Path of Souls is the Native American name for the Milky Way. And it's a book all about the origins of Native American star myths. And it shows that the two most important constellations to literally 30 to 40 different tribes in North America were Cygnus and Orion, and that the two constellations played a dual role. Orion was the first stepping stone from this world into the Milky Way, and that once they'd achieved that, they then went round to Cygnus, and from that point made another leap into a sky world or afterlife, which was located in the vicinity of the Cygnus constellation. So there is a relationship between the two constellations. So it shouldn't be seen as a case of one or the other. It's just that sometimes, it's easy to see everything as either black or white. But, let's not worry about that for the moment. The most important thing, as you say, is that these people had certain stars. They had what's known to cosmologists as their own cosmic geography. In other words, they're different sky routes, they're different highways that they believed would take them to the sky world or the upper world. And that's reflected in the orientation of the different stones at Gobeckly Tepi, with Cygnus being unquestionably the main one involved.
Well, I was going to ask you, Andrew, what is the odds that they got this here belief about the Cygnus and it being the pathway to the afterlife that they could have derived it in ancient times from an extraterrestrial race that might have came from the Cygnus constellation.
Well, it's an interesting idea. However, I think that it's probably a little bit more, I'd say complicated. It might not be the right word, but a bit more obtruse than this. Because, I mean, if you look at what a shaman does, I mean, a shaman is essentially a more indigenous form of what we would know today as the psychic or the channeler. And what does a psychic or channeler do? They communicate with spirits, they communicate with intelligences that they believe exist outside of the subconscious mind or the conscious mind. And, you know, who knows? There is a chance that some of them really are communicating with intelligences that are beyond our understanding. And this is almost certainly what was going on amongst the shamans of Gobeckly Tepi, that they believed that they could enter into the sky world and communicate with what are generally referred to as power animals, i.e. animals that essentially took on human form and could talk to the shaman. They could also communicate with celestial beings, i.e. the makers of the cosmos, however they were perceived. Plus, they could also talk to their ancestor spirits, the ancestors of their own families, you know, the families of their, you know, the other little tribal groups that they were associated with or whatever. Now, who's to say that some of these weren't actually extraterrestrials masquerading in another form? But this was the way that these ancient peoples had to acknowledge these intelligences. In other words, they couldn't have seen them as little green men. They had to see them in a form that they could accept and understand. You know, today we see these intelligences as spacemen, you know, in spacesuits coming down in nuts and bolts spacecraft. You know, but this is something that's born out of the modern space era, something that's only really 60, 70 years old.
Technological era.
Yeah, but 500 years ago, we were seeing the same objects and interpreting them as the abodes of the fairy folk, you know, of elves and fairies and things like this. Or we saw them associated with demons, or we associated them with angels and even gods and goddesses. And much earlier in time, the chances are that our deep ancestors, those that constructed places like Gobeckly Tepi, saw them as perhaps ancestor spirits, you know, that the ancestor spirits had passed on and become these divine beings that were now returning back to them in this shining form, if you like. So that's the more easier way of communication from an extraterrestrial source to a terrestrial source. You know, I'm not dismissing the idea of you know, ancient visitors. I'm not. But what I'm saying is that there's an easier way of communication, and that's directly through the human mind. That's more likely to have influenced human evolution. But I think that there's more, because the strange-looking people that turned up at Gobeckly Tepi, you know, this elite group that took over, who archaeology refers to as the Swiderians, who were this very advanced culture that existed to the north of the Black Sea and that came down through the Caucasus into eastern Turkey. They were strange looking. They were very tall, which suggests that they were connected with the original Cro-Magnon people, you know, like the earliest anatomically modern humans. But they had features that also marked them out as Neanderthal. They had very strong eyebrows. They had other features which seemed to suggest that these people could have been hybrids of Neanderthals and hybrids of anatomically modern humans. Anatomical remains have been found that backs this up. So what's going on here then? I mean, you know, how does this fit into what we know about Gobeckly Tepi? Well, the fact of the matter is that we now know that between 3 and 5% of the human population has Neanderthal DNA inside us, okay? And that's almost everybody that's outside of the African continent. And the reason for this is that from around 250,000 years ago down to around 30,000 years ago, the whole of Europe, right the way across to Southwest Asia, and even up into the Arctic region, the Neanderthals ruled. They were the main people that existed, and they were very advanced people. I mean, you know, we put them down. We've degenerated them into little more than human apes until now. But almost every month, more and more genetic evidence is telling us that these people were as advanced as anatomically modern humans, and almost certainly in some areas they were more advanced than us, and that they may well have given us some things like art and language and possibly, and this is the crucial bit, cosmology and veneration of subtle psychic elements of the cosmos. You know, in other words, they may well have been the ones that introduced us to certain forms of shamanism. And this is a very, very exciting prospect. And when you bring that into the mix, and then mix these people, the Neanderthals, with anatomically modern humans, whose ideas were more rationalistic, more survival-based, more exact, you know, more methodical, and then you start creating a hybrid who's extremely advanced, and that was the type of person that entered into the fray, entered the scene of Göbekli Tepe around 9,600, 9,500 BC. You know, that's the sort of people that were behind the construction of Göbekli Tepe. So in other words, there was an elite, a ruling elite, that looked different to the local population, but the local population themselves got together to create these monuments. And as they created them, changes took place. The Neolithic revolution began. The changeover from hunter-gatherers to the more settled farmer, the agriculturalist, the animal domesticator, the pastoralist, living in settled communities. And the reason for this is that places like Göbekli Tepe, and I don't think it was the only one. I mean, you know, we're now investigating Göbekli Tepe's sister site, which is about 45 miles away to the southeast of it. I was there just a few weeks ago. And what these places did was put a strain on the local hunting capabilities of the people and of the animals that were available, and they needed another form of food supply. So that's when they started domesticating animals, and also they started to utilize and domesticate wild forms of wheat and rye and barley for the first time. Now, when I say the first time, I mean we'd been experimenting with agriculture right the way from around 30,000 BC. You know, and it was there in Egypt, for instance, around 13,500 BC. You know, it's there in Greece, possibly in Israel, possibly in a few other places around the world. But it would seem that at the time of Göbekli Tepe, it now became a necessity to actually put this whole thing into production. And that's what caused the revolution, really. I mean, in the past, it was believed that the agriculture came first, and then after that, people had time to sit down and ponder over the mysteries of the universe. So they started building temples. The temples created, or needed an infrastructure around them. This in itself was the foundation points of city-states and kingdoms and things like that. That's now known to be incorrect. We now know that the temples came first, and that the temples, like Göbekli Tepe, started to be built immediately after the end of this mini ice age. And there's no coincidence. In other words, it was the cataclysm that really changed everything, or really was the trigger that changed everything.
Well, that certainly answers a question I've had for many years, because I've often wondered, knowing man to be hard to motivate to do hard tasks, what would motivate ancient men to be any different to take on these huge products like the Giza Pyramid and Gobeckly Tepi and other, Baalbek and what have you, given their nature of not wanting to take on such huge jobs that take so long. But I think now the answer might be they wanted to build something that a cataclysm could not destroy.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And also something that looked like it fit the part, really. I mean, it's not that Göbekli Tepe was the first, temples constructed. I mean, they've been creating wooden stuff, and also obviously cave sanctuaries for tens of thousands of years. But this was supersizing it. I mean, that's the difference. Up to that point, everything was really small. Now, suddenly, you were constructing monuments, up to sort of 50, 60 feet across, huge, great circles of stone, 15, 20 tons a piece. Some of these pillars, as much as 18 feet, standing at 18 feet from the ground. I mean, in the local quarry at Göbekli Tepe, there's an unfinished monolith that weighs around 50 tons. There's 22 feet in length. Now, I mean, that's the maximum size that we're going to here. And this is like something that you would find in Egypt around the time of the pyramids, several thousand years later. And yet all of this was going on at Göbekli Tepe in 9,500 BC, which is extraordinary. And you've got to come up with a very unique answer as to why people would have been doing this. They weren't just doing it because they had nothing better to do, as has been suggested by some archaeologists. They said, obviously the local communities decided to get together and make a nice temple for themselves. I mean, that's crap, to be honest. I mean,
no, they'd rather get together and have a nice barbecue for themselves.
Well, in all honesty, they'd rather not get together at all. I mean, hunter-gatherers are people that live in temporary settlements that go around in small groups. They have their family, possibly an extended social group, and that's it. They might enter settlements that are already prepared that they would go and live in for maybe a month, a couple of months before moving on to the next part of their cycle of their life, and then do the same with another one, and then eventually return back to their place of the start of their journey. That's what hunter-gatherers do. That's what their life is about. They follow the herds. They follow the particular totemic animals that they're associated with. I mean, certainly on the ground.
Find it.
They don't get together in their thousands to create huge, great temple structures. That was not the way it is. And so to come up with answers for Göbekli Tepe, you've got to look outside of the box. And that's what I've tried to do with this book.
Okay. Well, listen, we got like 7 minutes remaining on the show, so I thought maybe because always before I get to the end of the show, I like to ask my guests if there's anything they want to tell us about their book while we still got time to cover it.
Well, I mean, firstly, the work continues. I mean, any of your listeners out there, I mean, I urge you to look at the articles that I've done, which you can access via andrewcollins.com, www.andrewcollins.com, and have a read. And if you like what you read there, please, do go out and get the book, Göbekli Tepe, Genesis of the Gods, because this is the foundation point of everything, ultimately. There is no older stone temple complex anywhere in the world that's recognised by science today. That's one. And secondly, once you have looked at this material, by all means contact me, because you might suss something out that I've missed and other people are just not seeing. So fresh eyes is very important here. So I'm happy to communicate, to correspond with people. And the other thing, obviously, and I've got to do this. I mean, if you are looking for a book, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, or any other online website that does books, just type in Gobeckly Tepi into the search engine. My book will come up, and and have a look at it. Have a read at the introduction. The other thing is that if you want to come with us to Gobeckly Tepi in September, we're doing a tour out there to not only Gobeckly Tepi, but also its newly discovered sister site, which is called Karahan Tepe. It's not as large as Gobeckly, but it promises to be just as exciting. And this is in the Tek Mountains of southeast Turkey. The same culture created it. You've also got alignments towards Cygnus, it would seem, there as well. But it's a new ball game. It's something else that we're just getting our teeth into now and trying to understand. Very little is written about it. I first went there in 2004 when it was virtually unknown to the outside world. And now it's going to be big news. So all details of the tours, of the books, just come on to www.andrewcollins.com.
All righty then. And everybody, I want to remind y'all that we're making changes here at Talk Now Radio too, hopefully for the better. I'm trying to get set up to broadcast from my tablet so that if I'm away in the hospital, I won't have to have my show down. So wish me luck with that little project. I don't know if I can succeed or not, but I'm going to try. Don't forget to come back this coming Wednesday. And I'm going to be interviewing, James Welsh for his new book coming out called Corroborating Evidence. He's actually got an image that he took off the NASA website that he says you can see a reflection of the Hubble telescope on the hull of the UFO that's within close vicinity of it. That to him is proof positive that the UFO phenomena is an extraterrestrial phenomena since it is occurring out in space by the Hubble telescope. So you don't want to miss that one. That's Wednesday night at 7 p.m. And don't forget this coming Thursday, I do my 2-hour slot over at Revolution Radio. We're going to be talking to Trent Goodbody, and we're going to be discussing freedom from government. He going to give us a lot of tips about the law and what the Constitution and what freedom is really all about. And you'd probably be interested. I'd encourage y'all to come. And in the meantime, folks, y'all have a good weekend. Don't forget that we're going to have links to Andrew's books in the archives, and it's going to be on the front page until I get it in the archive. And we're going to be having his video over at YouTube, and we're going to have at least a 30-minute segment over at Daily Motion and a full segment here at Talk Now Radio. Feel free to invite your friends to come over, and please invite your friends to come join the site and get into chat and ask questions and talk and enjoy each other's company during our future shows. I'm going to call that one a wrap with that. Thank you guys very much. We'll see you next time.